The Environmental Protection Agency is often controversial as they work to protect our air, land, and water. They recently issued a new set of rules about the waters of the United States that has some folks pretty stirred up. We'll talk to the EPA and get the details next on Show Me Ag. Welcome to Show Me Ag. I'm your host, Kyle Vickers. Thanks for joining us. The EPA recently issued a new rule which has some folks pretty upset. The rule is designed to clarify what waters of the United States are to be regulated, and some farm groups are saying it's a big overreach of the EPA's authority and will cause Missouri farmers a new set of headaches complying with federal regulations as they go about the business of producing food and fiber. We're going to get to the bottom of this controversy with our guest, Flournoy, Director of the Water, Wetlands, and Pesticide Division for the Environmental Protection Agency, Region 7 in Kansas City. Karen, thanks for being with us. About a year ago, we visited with you, and at the time, they were proposed rules. Let's go back over a little bit of history and then get to where we are now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And since I was here last summer, the proposed rule went out for public comment. We had a 207-day comment period, received probably about 1 million comments. And since that time, the EPA and Corps of Engineers staff have been working to develop the final rule. We had a number of our staff from our Region 7 office in Kansas City help develop that final rule. Part of what we did was pass on and advocate for the comments that we heard from the many stakeholders that we talked to here in Region 7. So the rule is final now and will be published soon in the Federal Register and will become effective 60 days after it's published in the Federal Register.
How do you distill a million comments into a final rule?
Well, there were a lot of comments that were the same or very similar, and then there were several thousand very specific comments. And included with the rule is a response to the public comments.
And so now this rule is issued. What's the next step, so to speak? It becomes has the rule of law?
Yes, it's final now. So we are working with the Corps of Engineers on implementation. And along with the Corps, we'll be working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the state environmental and agriculture agencies, all who are partners in working with us on implementation of this rule.
You mentioned the Corps of Engineers. Again, still kind of on background, this really came out of a conflicting Supreme Court ruling regarding you folks on the Corps?
Right. Section 404 of the Clean Water Act is a section that both the Corps of Engineers and EPA implement. The Corps actually issues the Section 404 permits, which are for dredge and fill activities in waters of the U.S. So this final rule is a joint rule signed by both the Corps of Engineers and EPA, and we work jointly to implement this rule.
Well, if I remember the commentary right, and of course it's been in the ag press and so on, but there was a lot of confusion about what waters were going to be included. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. The goal of the proposed rule and the final rule was to further clarify which waters are waters of the U.S., which waters are jurisdictional, and which are not.
Well, to help clarify these rules some more, we went to look at some examples of what features would be covered or not under the new rules. We're going to do a little ground truthing. We're on the farm of Bill Heffernan near Rocheport, Missouri. It's a beautiful farm. It's been in his family for a while, and he does a great job with conservation, and he has got several aspects of what the waters of the U.S. might cover, and that's what we're going to take a look at. In trying to define the streams that are going to be covered under the new rule, we're standing beside this stream here. Can you tell me a little bit about it and how it meets the specifications?
Sure, Kyle. Tributaries have always been considered jurisdictional waters, and what we've done in the final Clean Water Rule is further defined what a tributary is. So this is an example of a jurisdictional tributary, and here's why. It has a bed, a bank, and an ordinary high water mark. As you can see, there's flow. The water's flowing in this tributary right now. It wouldn't necessarily have to have flow in it it does have to have those physical characteristics of a bed, a bank, and an ordinary high water mark. So that's what makes this a jurisdictional tributary.
This stream might actually be dry in other times, but because it is traditionally or more typically a flowing stream, it comes under the new rule.
Right, and it has the correct physical characteristics for the definition of tributary.
Okay. We're looking at an impounded water source now, and does that come under your jurisdiction?
Yes, in this case, this impounded water, which impounded the tributary that we just saw, would be considered a jurisdictional water, a water of the U.S.
And what makes this different from another impounded source?
Well, this one has the tributary. It was built in the tributary, and that is what makes it a water of the U.S.
And it discharges into the lower level of the tributary, which then feeds another creek or stream down the line.
Right, and ultimately those tributaries connect to the Missouri River.
And as we're standing here, there's a waterway and there's a area where they've got grass buffer from the cropland. Is that under your jurisdiction?
No, those conservation practices, and on this farm there are many, grassed waterways, grass buffers, terraces, those are not jurisdictional, those are not waters of the United States.
We're upland of some of the pieces that we've already looked at, and we're on a field which, as you can see, is planted in beans, but it's developed a problem. Is this something that you guys are going to be taking a look at?
No, here we have a gully, and we do not regulate gullies, rills, or any kind of an erosional feature. And in this case, we're standing in a bean field that has been no-till, and also the beans were planted in a cover crop. And some excessive rain last year has resulted in the formation of this gully, and we do not in any way regulate a feature like this gully.
If the owner wanted to come in here and try to use a dozer or his own equipment to try to repair this, would that be an issue for you guys?
Well, he can do maintenance on his field where he's not doing that maintenance in a water feature.
So we're looking at another impoundment. It's quite a bit smaller than the other one, but that's not really the distinction that makes it in or out.
That's correct. The pond we're looking at now is constructed in the upland or in dry land, and all ponds like this, all farm ponds like this, would not be regulated under the Clean Water Rule.
So size is really not the issue, it's what is damming up, what it's stopping.
Right. Size is not the issue. The issue is whether or not the pond is constructed in a tributary.
We're in kind of a deep ditch here. It's really 2 or 3 feet below the surrounding area, but there's no water in it. Would this be under your jurisdiction?
No, this ditch would not be a regulated ditch. It only carries water when it rains, so it's not regulated.
So the depth is not the issue. It's whether or not it's collecting water and runs regularly as a tributary.
Right, that is correct. If this ditch was constructed in a tributary, like we saw earlier, then it would be a regulated ditch.
People have talked about whether puddles would be regulated, so we've picked out a puddle. It's a wet time of year here in Missouri, a beautiful cornfield, except right here in this corner. Would this, what would EPA have to say about this?
Okay, well, as Kyle said, during the public comment period, we heard a lot of questions about puddles, and were we regulating puddles? And no, we are not. We would not regulate this puddle. And in the final rule, which just came out, we specifically said puddles are exempt from the Clean Water Rule.
Our thanks to the Heffernans for allowing us to spend some time with them today and look over their beautiful farm. So we look at these places, and we have some places that are and are not under your jurisdiction. Right. But the issue of jurisdiction is one thing, but what happens to these places? So if a place, a feature is under your jurisdiction, what is the implication for the farmer?
Okay. For example, today we saw a tributary on Mr. Heffernan's farm, and that tributary would not be under our jurisdiction unless he would alter that tributary or add pollutants to it. So he could have a jurisdictional tributary on his farm that would stay that way as long as he did not alter it or change it in any way. And then he would have to talk with the Corps of Engineers to determine what kind of permit would be needed depending upon the activities he would be conducting in the tributary.
There's some language in the rule, as I've seen, that kind of exempts regular, what I would consider normal agricultural activities. Right. I don't know exactly what the wording is, but tell us a little bit about how that would work.
Right. Well, the exemptions are normal farming, ranching, and silviculture, but things like harvesting, planting, moving livestock across or through a stream, all of those are considered normal farming practices that would be exempt.
So if he's getting ready, or any of us are getting ready to alter something, is there a permit process then that we go to who do we go to?
Go to the Corps of Engineers.
And so what is the EPA's role? In other words, let's say I'm wanting to do something on my farm. Do I have to contact an EPA official?
No, if you were going to alter a tributary that was on your farm, you would talk to the Corps of Engineers, and they would be the ones to make a decision of whether or not a permit was needed based upon the activities you were going to conduct.
Does this create some uncertainty for farmers then about what's permitted and what's not?
Well, we hope that, and the goal of the final rule was to make it a lot clearer what is jurisdictional and what is not. For example, the ditch we saw today is not a jurisdictional ditch.
The one that's not got running water.
Right, because it doesn't have running water. But if that ditch was built in a tributary, then it would be a ditch that would be considered jurisdictional.
Okay, so we have these features that are going to be considered here. What seems to be the uproar? It seems like it's a fairly harmless rule in that we don't have to really we don't have to have an EPA official on site before we dig a hole.
Right, and we wouldn't be on site before you dig a hole. Mm-hmm. You would work with the Corps. Many farmers, of course, are maybe using farm bill programs to construct conservation features, which are exempt. But oftentimes they'll be working with NRCS, and they may recommend that the farmer see the Corps and determine whether or not a permit is needed.
And what about some of our livestock operations? We know that there's some waste production there. Mm-hmm. Tell us how that's going to work in the livestock operations.
Okay. Well, if it's a large livestock operation that has a discharge permit under the Clean Water Act, then nothing would change for that operation.
Their existing permit will work there.
Right, remains the same.
What about smaller livestock operations? Are they completely exempt?
Well, the livestock operation itself, if it doesn't meet the discharge permitting requirements, wouldn't need a discharge permit. Now, much like we've already talked about, if there was a tributary on their farm that they were going to alter, then they would have to get a dredge and fill discharge permit, or they would need to at least talk to the Corps and determine what kind of permit is needed. There are individual permits, general permits, and nationwide permits that could apply to those dredge and fill activities.
So what about, you mentioned smaller versus larger. Can you tell us a little distinction about that? How many hogs, cows, chickens what's the distinction there?
Okay, well, the easiest one to talk about is a beef feedlot. If it has greater than 1,000 head of cattle, then it needs a discharge permit.
That's the equivalent on, I think, hogs, it's 2,500 on site?
2,500, depending on size. There's a little size distinction on hogs.
So there's really no permitting change in that, except we've clarified these waters issue.
Right, that's correct.
So what is going to be the impact? Let's talk about the impact on the other side. I know that there was a lot of folks from the I guess the environmental side of things that were active, and they have commented. Are they happy with this rule? Do they think that it's gone far enough?
Well, I haven't seen or heard a lot from the environmental community and what I've read in the media so far. Particularly the conservation organizations, hunting, fishing, seem to be very positive about the changes that were made between the proposed and final rule. In our region and the outreach meetings that we did on the proposed rule, many of the environmental groups who attended did have some questions about how the rule would be implemented as it was written then. Mm-hmm. We haven't had an opportunity yet to talk to them to see what they think about the final rule.
And there's going to be some opportunities for people to hear more about this rule over the next few weeks, I assume, in addition to what's on the press and on the internet.
Sure. Yesterday was the first public webinar that anyone could sign up for, and I think we'll have the website here at the end that people can keep track of what webinars and other educational activities are going on. In our region this week, we just went out to Manhattan, Kansas, and met with ag stakeholders in Kansas, talked with the Kansas State University folks about the Clean Water Rule, and we'll be doing that again in the states in our region, like we did for the proposed rule.
So what, from the public's perspective, I guess, why is this rule necessary? What's the big deal, if you will, with trying to bring these waters under your jurisdiction?
Okay. Well, I think there's several big deals about it. The Clean Water Act is designed to protect streams and wetlands that are scientifically shown to have the greatest impact on downstream water quality. So what we're trying to do here is to clarify and protect those upstream waters so that a downstream water that provides water supply, for example, would be protected. Also, there were two Supreme Court decisions about the definition of waters of the U.S. that in 2001 and 2006 that made it more complicated. So oftentimes the Corps or EPA was looking much broader at waters than what this new proposed rule sets out.
So it's really, in a way, a little narrower definition than what you were working under previously.
Right. For what we used to call, and still call, a jurisdictional determination, but in the rule language they call it a case-specific analysis, that could have been done on waters far away from a jurisdictional water. The final rule sets some boundaries, some distance limits about how far out those case-specific analyses can be conducted.
So what you're really looking at is tributaries that feed into a major river, which all do. That I know the Missouri River is a great water supply for many of the towns, cities along the river through clear to New Orleans.
Right.
So what's your effort to protect them? I mean, are we making progress in that regard?
Well, from a water quality standpoint, certainly we are. And part of the objective of this rule is to protect those waters that go up, but yet put some boundaries about how far away we would go from the Missouri River, for example.
So in that way, it's limiting the jurisdiction a little bit.
That's our goal, the Corps' goal.
Well, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding. There was some funny YouTube videos about people in a canoe in a dry ditch and so on and so forth. So these things we hope are clarified, and we saw a lot of that on the Heffernan farm today.
Right.
So what's the next step? I know there's some calls among Congress and from some ag groups to say Congress needs to kick this out. Is that going to happen?
Well, I don't know. I can't speak to that. What I can tell you about what EPA and the Corps will be doing next is we are already working to develop implementation guidance that will take the final rule and say how it works in the field, how it will be implemented in the field across the country. Also, NRCS and the state agencies are very heavily engaged in that. This rule was reviewed under interagency review, so USDA had a significant role in reviewing the rule before it was final. So we're working on that implementation guidance. And then what we will do in this part of the country is take that and see if we have some unique features here, some unique challenges here that we need to look at how the rule applies to. And I think, as you can imagine, you're trying to write a rule across the whole country, and you've got such variation in water features, quantity of water, size of waters, that to put it all into one rule is a bit challenging. So that implementation guidance will help narrow it down to specific areas of the country. We can take that and implement here.
Much different problems in California where they're suffering a long-term drought versus the flooding that we're suffering here in parts of the Midwest,
Exactly
especially
right.
This month.
Exactly right.
So what's the role of the state agencies in Missouri? I assume that is the Department of Natural Resources then? Is that the enforcement arm, if you will, for these rules?
Well, the enforcement arm for the rule really is EPA. A state agency could assume authority to issue those 404 permits. There's 2 states in the country that have. They would work with us and the Corps to assume that program, much as they have the discharge permit programs. But at this point, we are the ones who typically take the enforcement actions. The Corps has some authority that they utilize, and then depending upon the issues associated with a particular situation, they will send those to us, and we will determine whether or not it's appropriate to take an enforcement action under the Clean Water Act.
So again, you guys have, I say you guys, pardon me, but the agency has had all these a million comments, but now that you're starting the implementation process, is there still room for comment and public input?
Well, this question came up in the webinar yesterday, and it's a final rule, so there is not an opportunity for more formal public comment.
Okay, so it's pretty well set in stone unless Congress takes some pretty drastic action.
The rule itself is, yes, that's correct. Or the court decides to weigh in on this.
I hope this clarifies. This is still taking a lot of heat from some of the ag groups.
Right.
I hope this works to clarify. I hope, in fact, our program does work to clarify.
Sure.
Let's change subjects just a little bit. The EPA is also involved in air quality issues, similar issues sometimes with clean air, and also something that's dear to farmers' hearts is the renewable fuel standards. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. At the end of May, EPA issued a proposed rule with the renewable fuel standard volume estimates for 2014 through 2016 and then 2017 for biofuels. That public comment period is open right now. And in Kansas City, let me double check my date here, on June 25th, there will be a public hearing on the proposed rule in Kansas City, Kansas. So anyone is welcome to submit comments. And just as with the Clean Water Rule, the rule has instructions about how to send your public comments or to come to the public hearing in Kansas City, Kansas, and have an opportunity to state your comments at the hearing.
And so for those folks who are renewable fuel has to do with ethanol and soy diesel.
Right.
And what's the proposed rule proposing?
Well, it's about the fuel volumes. And so that we did not set numbers in 2014, and we're into 2015 now, and we're setting numbers for both of those years. So what it does is sets those numbers. Folks have an opportunity to then comment on whether or not they think those numbers are adequate. And there's a set of requirements around how those numbers get set.
There's also, and maybe this isn't within your purview, but with the clean air rules, there's some rules that were proposed last year that would reduce the usage of coal or require cleaner air discharge from power plants. Where are we at in that process?
Well, the Clean Power Plan is still under development, and that process is still going on.
So that rule has not officially been proposed yet? I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot on something that I'll take that back.
I don't think I can answer that one. I better not go there.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Sorry.
So nowadays, if a farmer wants to learn more about this new EPA rule, what's his resource?
Well, we have a website that has fact sheets, has the final rule, has the response to comments. There's also a technical support document that is developed with each rule that the agency issues, and that technical support document really gets down in the weeds and of the technical basis for the rulemaking. So all of those documents are on our website. There's going to be some PowerPoint presentations and some other educational documents that, if they aren't up already, will be up very soon. So all of those resources are there for folks to
I think we mentioned
review.
Public meetings. You probably you haven't got one scheduled yet, but probably a public meeting proposed for Columbia probably later next month.
We're going to, like we did with the proposed rule, we had sort of invitation-only meetings to talk to different groups of stakeholders, agriculture being one, and we're looking at trying to set some of those up in all 4 states. We also are looking to set up webinars that folks could call in and probably have them somewhat stakeholder group specific, because clearly the development community has different questions and issues than agriculture, and the environmental organizations have some different questions. So in our region, we're looking to set up a different kinds of webinars and education opportunities.
You're talking about the development community. If you're a builder or something like that, looking at maybe transforming agricultural land into development land, that's a separate issue, right? You're definitely going to have some permitting and some rules, extra rules there.
Well, it depends on what they're doing and what the features of the land are that they are developing. But certainly this proposed rule and the final rule are of great interest to developers. And there's a specific fact sheet and a lot of specific information available in terms of how this rule impacts development.
I appreciate your time coming and the time we spent out on the farm today. It was a nice day to be out. But I think that for me has really clarified some of the questions that have been bouncing around since last year.
Great.
So I hope our viewers see that as well.
Okay.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to say thanks again to Karen Flournoy for being with us, and a special thanks to Bill Heffernan and his family for letting us visit their beautiful farm. And we'd also like to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in to Show Me Ag. We hope you'll tune in next time for another look at a topic touching rural Missouri. For everyone here at KMOS and myself, good night. We're also very interested in what you have to say. So if you have feedback you'd like to share with us, you can email us at showmeag@kmos.org or find us on Facebook.